Recently, two new foods deemed nano, well, I guess errata, what is no longer nano, have entered the market. And that is the Aquarium Co-op, now Magic Small Fish Food. It was called Nano. You'll even see Nano on the packaging. And Northfin's Nano Bits. But how do these two foods compare to a more common nano that a lot of us are used to, Xtreme's Nano? Let's talk about all three of these foods. Is one of them better than all of the others? What are the positives and negatives of each? And how do they compare? Hello everyone, this is Bentley, and today it's a fish food battle. But seriously, so like recently, both of these two foods, the Aquarium Co-op and the Northfin, have come out. There's some dispute. I won't go into that yet. I want to talk the facts first. But how does it compare to the original Xtreme Nano, which a lot of us are big fans of? I know I personally don't use the Nano as much as I use a lot of their flake products, but I know people that absolutely love this food. I do keep it around my fish room for really specific reasons. So let's talk about each, where the benefits are, where the negatives are, and all that jazz. So number one, while I'm talking about this, I'm going to show you B-roll of each of these foods being fed in two different tanks, and the measurements matter. So for the Guppy Mansion, I'm feeding one level scoop of this API medicine scoop that I've had left over from an empty medicine thing. So each time I'm feeding, it is exactly the same amount by volume, roughly. You could argue technically by granular size, there might be slightly more Aquarium Co-op food than the other two, and slightly more nano than the Northfin. So slightly more extreme than Northfin. So yeah, but it's minimal difference. And then in the case of Fallen Forest, which is the other tank I'm using these measuring spoons. And if you want the exact thing, it is 1 dash and 1 pinch, the combo of the two. So if you've ever used these, I use them very often, especially for dosing like CChem Safe when I'm doing water changes. But these are really, really handy for lots of very small measurements in the fish room. Let's start with the original Xtreme Nano. It's a fairly small granule, and you'll definitely see that. But let's talk about the positives and negatives of it really, really fast. About half of it will float, and about half of it will sink. So if you're trying to feed both bottom feeders and topwater feeders at the same time, this is actually a phenomenal food. And it is a fairly small granule size so that most of your standard community fish will be able to eat this. Specifically, it is 0.5 millimeters, so that's about 500 micron for those who care about the micron measurements. Pretty good size. This is great for a number of different fish species, ranging from rainbow fish to some of your cichlids, etc., etc. Where this might be a struggle in comparison to some of the other foods out there, or maybe even something like flake, is it's a little harder to grind down any smaller, so if you're a tiny, tiny fry, this might be too big for them to eat. Also, it doesn't sit in the midwater super long. However, it does sit in the midwater a bit longer than some other foods. So that's the extreme. That's the basics. We could go down crude analysis, the guaranteed analysis, and all the materials. I think you guys are well aware that Xtreme makes a pretty good food. Let's talk about Northfin. I got this tiny package. I know. The Northfin, I couldn't get an exact size looking at the packaging and some of the information online, but you will notice when we do a granule size comparison that it is significantly larger than both the Aquarium Co-op and Xtreme foods. And that, I think, is one of the bigger problems. And I don't know what it is, but this food sinks extremely fast. So if you're trying to feed mostly bottom-dwelling fish, and basically almost no midwater fish, this food's actually pretty great. Northfin is really known for very high-quality products, minimum fillers, all that kind of stuff. So I don't expect the food to be a bad food, but if you're dealing with a lot of midwater and upper water column feeders, this does not sit in the water column that long. And you'll notice from the footage, it falls pretty quick. And this footage is a bit shorter than any others because it doesn't really linger up at the top side of the water all that long either. As it gets slowly saturated with water, it sinks very, very fast, which can be a positive if you're trying to feed certain bottom water fish, maybe like corridors or something. This might actually be something really good because its speed at which it sinks could get past other food or other fish, like maybe rainbows or something like that. They're really boisterous eaters, we'll put it that way. And now Aquarium Co-Op. This is the tiniest granule of all of them. It's 0.2 millimeter, typically, which means 200 microns. So it's significantly smaller than any of the other foods, and because of that size, or maybe it's something else, I'm not really sure. I originally suspected it might be the amount of crude fat that is in the food, but it's not that high. It's only at 6%. This floats in the water very well. And what I mean is, you'll have some on the top water, and as you're watching this, you'll see it, but tons of it will move around in the midwater, and this is even with reasonable water flow. Keep in mind that the Guppy Mansion is 140 gallons with an FX6, so it's not a ton of water churn, but it is a reasonable amount of water churn. And then the Fallen Forest footage, you are seeing a 40-gallon tank with a F-Zone Astra Stream set at speed 3, so there's a reasonable amount of water movement in that tank. And you can kind of see that in the top water, but despite all that water movement, this food floats extremely well in the mid-column and stays floating quite a while. Where some of the negatives might come into is if you do need something that sinks to the ground a bit faster for certain fish, whether you got loaches or corydoras, etc., this might not get down there fast enough. However, you'll probably see that in the footage that my Garas in this Guppy Mansion go wild on the leaves, because the stuff that does land, it's such a fine granule size that it kind of carpets everything. And Alex from formerly Secret History Living Inside Your Aquarium, now Fishery. I'm so used to his old name that I screw up sometimes. But my buddy Alex talked about this, and one of his negatives for this food was the fact that it can kind of blanket everything, so it's easy to overfeed, and that could, if you don't have a lot of cleanup crew dealing with that excess food, lead to some problems of potentially the food getting foul sitting in the water too long, unless you have reasonable flow. I don't see that as big a negative personally, but that's because I kind of have cleanup crews in almost every tank. But if you're overfeeding, it might be hard to deal with all of the food that gets scattered everywhere unless you have a very robust cleaning crew that are going to go everywhere. Garas might be your best friend in this case. So, now that we've talked about each of these foods, let's compare the granule size. I want you to just look at this B-roll that I took using my 90mm macro lens. I mean, it's obvious, right? The first one we're looking at, you're looking at the Xtreme Nano versus the Northfin. And the Northfin is the larger of the two foods, and it's a really obvious difference in granule size compared to the Xtreme. And then we change over to the Xtreme versus the Aquarium Co-Op. And that is an obvious difference in size, that 500 or 0.5 millimeter versus the 200 or 0.2 millimeter, microns to millimeters here. You can definitely tell a difference. The Aquarium Co-Op food is significantly smaller. So, in theory, if you have a lot of very tiny fish or smaller fry, this food has a little bit more flexibility. But it also could be potentially a risk if your goal is to feed a huge variety of sized fish. That might be where something where the Xtreme might be a better option, because that slightly larger granule size might get certain larger fish to eat it a little more regularly. Although what I have found is, I've been feeding this for a couple weeks now, by the way. The Co-Op food kind of mimics decapsulated brine shrimp in the water, or even regular brine, where it does float and kind of dance in the water flow. It's not going to mimic live baby brine shrimp, right? But it does sit in the water flow in a way that I think will cause some hunting instincts, and I think that's a big positive. Xtreme will float a little bit, and then the Northfin, it just sinks. It really doesn't sit in the mid-column at all. I honestly think that this Northfin food is a massive failure from Northfin. And the final comparison, of course, granule size is the Northfin to the Aquarium Co-Op, and that's just apples to pineapples. It is a massive difference in granule size, and it's almost comical to call the Northfin Nano bits, because its size is just not. I don't think it's playing the same ball game as Xtreme or Aquarium Co-Op are with their nano-sized foods. Again, despite the fact that mine says nano on the packaging, they have changed that. That's for legal reasons. Xtreme has a trademark on the name Nano for a fish food. So using Nano actually is a legal violation, and I believe some paperwork was served to the Aquarium Co-op, and they've changed the name of the food. They just have a certain amount of the packaging that will still say Nano on it. I guess someone might consider it a collector's item. I don't know, but it will change to, I think it's the Magic Small Fish Feed or something along those lines. I'll put it exactly down here, but here's the real question. Is there a massive difference in the food? Because the Aquarium Co-op food is a small-ish container. It's 4 ounces or 113 grams, but the price is pretty good on it. And because of how small it is and realistically how little you might need to use, this can last you a decent amount, especially if you're only, say, feeding 1 or 2 tanks. Now, if you're feeding many tanks or a massive guppy colony and a bunch of rainbow fish who are always hungry, just always, this might not last super long. But so far, I've really not dented it too hard, and I've been using it for about 2 weeks in some of my testing to just get a feel of how the food acts, how my fish react to it, etc., etc. Xtreme, on the other hand, I've used this for years at this point. I've kind of reduced where I feed it. I have certain tanks that love it. This actually goes to my retirement tank more often than anything because I have roseline sharks in there, and this is a great size food for them. It also has like half floating, half sinking, and they like to scour around, and then the rainbow fish like to get everything that sits in the top water. So it ends up working pretty well for the fish in that tank. This isn't something that I regularly feed to my guppies because I want stuff to sit in the water column a little longer, which is why I use flake for them. And rainbows will eat anything, so if I really need to, all my rainbow fish will eat this like crazy. And my Corydories love this food because it puts lots of stuff on the substrate for them to go and hunt down and enjoy. The Dojo Lodges like it too. So if you're curious, lots of fish like this stuff. But you can do similar with this, and it's even smaller. So if you have very, very small fish, you're doing something like the chili reservoirs or something like that, this might be the better option. Here's the last thing I want to talk about. And I'm really... Okay, there's two things. So this is obviously manufactured in China. Xtreme purposely does not manufacture in China because it allows them to control a lot of the quality standards. Specifically, this is made in the USA. Here's the thing. While China is really effective at making products cheap, which is why the price on this food is actually pretty good, and yes, Xtreme is a much more expensive food in comparison.
Editor Bentley here, as you can tell by the hair. A quick note, as I'm sitting here editing this video, if you look at the price comparison of Xtreme Nano versus the Aquarium Co-Op, Aquarium Co-Op's new Magic Small Fish Feed is $11.99 for a 4-ounce container, whereas the smallest container that Aquarium Co-Op also sells of the Xtreme Nano is $14.49 for a 5-ounce container. If you compare this, your cost per ounce is actually cheaper to buy Xtreme Nano. The individual price might look higher, like the larger 20-ounce containers that I carry are $47.99. That seems like a lot at first, but if you consider that cost per ounce by weight, it's actually cheaper to buy Xtreme. Just a little caveat that I needed to edit into this for clarity. Let's go back to actual Bentley.
However, and there's going to be this, we have seen many, many times in various portions of the pet industry where China has included toxic chemicals in their feeds to save money. And to me, that is a massive risk. We've seen it in dog food, we've seen it in cat food, things like lead ending up in toxic levels that have caused severe illness. And because our fish are so much smaller than, say, our dogs or our cats, you might have that negative effect if something does happen to go wrong significantly faster. Do I think this is the case? I know that the Aquarium Co-Op tries to work really, really hard with their manufacturers in China to keep certain quality standards. But they can only control so much. And those manufacturers will inevitably do whatever they feel they can get away with because the quality standards and the requirements in China are significantly different than, say, the United States when it comes to requirements on certain items like pet food right? And there's just risk there. Do I think that means you can't possibly buy this food? No, actually, I think this food's pretty sweet. It does something very different and kind of unique within our hobby. The way that it sits in the mid-column is different than basically any other granule on the market that I'm aware of. While this is a fantastic food, it doesn't literally like dance in the water column like this does. So if you really do have a lot of mid-water small fish, this might be one of your go-tos. Or you might be a guy like me who just really likes flake food. Because flake food will do the same thing. With a lot less work. But I'm going to get to the last part here, and this is my bias, bitterness, you call it whatever you want. I know some people are going to beat me up in the comments, and that's okay. Co-op has been working with Xtreme for years. Years. And they kind of helped get Xtreme more familiarized in the market, especially with a lot of us freshwater keepers. While they had a bigger following among saltwater keepers, they worked with them quite a bit. And if they were developing a product like this, which Corey has said they spent a couple of years developing this, if I remember correctly, someone will correct me, I'm sure. Why didn't you work with Xtreme? Why didn't you work with Xtreme to keep that fundamental business, to keep that quality standard by getting a food that is typically made in the United States? Why the change? And also, like, it is a little nefarious when you've been working with a company for so long, and one of their key product lines is called Nano, and then you make a new food and call it Nano. Granted, they got hit with a trademark lawsuit, so that won't happen anymore, but to me, it's like, I can't believe you're going to claim ignorance, which, not to say that Corey has, but I feel like you did it on purpose. That's my gut feeling. I can't prove it. This is all speculation. I'm not accusing anything. I don't know anything. Blah, 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 blah. All your usual legal stuff. It's just a personal thing that, to me, feels a little off. And maybe there's a reason. You know, maybe Xtreme was incapable of making a food like that, or whatever. I kind of don't doubt it. We've seen Xtreme develop a number of different interesting foods over time. And I happen to know from my vague relationship with Xtreme that when they send me products, they listen to my feedback constantly. I'm a tiny guy. They would listen to all the feedback in the world from Corey, right? And Corey's staff, his company, he's got lots of tanks all the time with fish in his shop and his personal fish room. Folks like Master Breeder Dean that are his friends that he talks to regularly, and other fish keepers. It just feels weird to me, and I don't like it at all. I don't like it. Especially when you've been working with a company for years and talking about how great they are and pumping them up. I just feel wrong. Feel wrong. It's still a really cool food. And that's the thing that I can't deny. It's a very cool food. It does something I feel is kind of unique, but I worry long term about whether or not this food can keep at this kind of quality, keep the granule size, keep the consistency, and not get potential pollutants in it. I don't really worry about that with these. The price might go up, and this is a more expensive food, but I often can buy it in a fairly big amount like this, and not only little bitty cans like this. This thing, this ain't even playing in the same ballgame. This stuff sucks. I've used this in a couple of tanks for a couple weeks as well. At the same time, I've been using the Aquarium Co-Op. I've rotated it between different tanks. I hate this stuff, and I'm glad I bought a tiny, tiny amount of it that is pretty close to gone. And yeah, I bought 2 little bags. 1 bag is gone. I'm almost done with this one, and when I am, I will never buy this ever again. This sucks. Sucks. For my purposes. I just don't like how fast it sinks. I guess if I had a lot of bottom-dwelling fish, that might be more important. And I don't like the granular size. It's too big. Good. Good. In the end, the question is, do you need a smaller granule or more mid-water feeding? Probably this food. If you have a bit more bottom feeding, or you want to be a little more controlled with how the food is moving around the tank, because this does blanket pretty hard if you feed too much, you might go with this. Or if you just really need it to not sit in the mid-water all the time, you have like specifically top water and bottom feeding, this might be a little bit better for you. Both great foods. Hopefully they stay like that. That's it. That's my review. And I know this isn't as in-depth and people will get pissed at some parts, but honestly, like, despite my personal qualms, if I take those away, because those are not the product, I still think the product is pretty good. I don't know that I'm going to buy a ton of this, because where this is best used is only one tank in my house. The rainbows don't chase this like crazy. They do chase it pretty well. But they similarly don't go as crazy for this. They go really crazy for the flake that I feed them. And maybe it's just because of how it hits the water and the smell it makes. It smells extra bad, so clearly it must taste extra good for fish, right? I'm not saying it actually smells bad, but more like it's more pungent. Pungent? Yeah. Community crave. I love that stuff. Anyway, but this does get a really good feeding reaction. I think part of it is because of how it moves in the water. It kind of simulates some of those natural hunting instincts. That could be a massive positive. If you've got fish that are really shy around more production foods, you might give this a try because maybe they will eat this. I've heard a lot of praise from Johnny, who works at Dance Fish, about using this inside their warehouse, and they have been loving this stuff. So that's a commercial grade fish facility. Probably has a lot better feedback than this dork. Anyway, gang, I would love to hear your comments down below. Have you tried the new aquarium stuff, or the new aquarium co-op food? Have you tried the Northfin food? Have you tried Xtreme? Have you tried all three? Let me know. I'd love to hear your feedback down below. If you're new to this channel, consider subscribing. It's one of the best ways to help small YouTube channels like myself grow, because if you like it and you tell the magic YouTube gods, like, hey, I like this thing, YouTube might tell a few other people, like, hey, you might check this out. As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.